The first thing one notices about our home is not the laughter of a happy family, but the echo of silence that fills the halls. I had grown accustomed to it, the sound of absence, of a husband too busy to notice the woman who waited for him night after night. My name is Syra, 35 years old, a stepmother whose marriage had grown steady but dull, a union of convenience rather than passion. My husband, Rafik, is a respectable man, hard-working and disciplined. Yet his attention belongs more to ledgers, contracts, and endless phone calls than to me. When Rafik's son from his first marriage, Adil, returned from university for the summer, the stillness of our home shifted. Adil was 21, tall, carrying the restless energy of youth that filled the spaces his father left empty. His arrival should have been simple, a son visiting his father. But I sensed from the beginning that it would bring a change I could not yet name. Adil was polite at first, addressing me with the formality expected of a stepson. He offered to help carry groceries, lingered in the kitchen while I prepared meals, and asked questions about things his father never noticed, whether I enjoyed reading, whether I missed my family, whether I ever felt lonely in the city. These questions struck me deeply, for they were the very ones I often avoided answering to myself. Meals at the table revealed the contrast between father and son. Rafik would sit silently, eyes glued to his phone, nodding absently as if conversation were an unnecessary burden. Adil, however, laughed easily, told small stories of campus life, and looked at me directly when speaking. For the first time in years, I felt noticed. I told myself it was harmless, yet the warmth in his eyes unsettled me. One afternoon, I stood in the garden arranging fruit for the household. The summer heat clung heavily, and I worked without thinking. Adil appeared suddenly, offering to help. His eyes lingered briefly on the melons I carried in my arms before darting away, his face flushed with a nervousness he tried to hide. I caught the glance, and for a heartbeat our eyes locked. The air thickened, and though no words were spoken, I understood the unspoken tension that had quietly slipped into our lives. I told myself it was only youthful awkwardness, nothing more. Yet, as I carried the basket inside, I could not ignore the faint quickening in my own chest. The glance had stirred something buried, something my marriage had long neglected. That night, as I lay beside Rafik, who snored softly after another long day of business, I thought not of him, but of the way Adil's eyes had flickered with an emotion both forbidden and undeniable. And in that moment, I realized that silence would no longer define this household. Something had awakened, and though I did not yet understand it, I knew it would not easily be put back to rest. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, yet beneath the surface something shifted with every passing hour. I told myself that Adil's glance in the garden had meant nothing, but the memory lingered stubbornly, coloring the way I saw him. He was no longer just my husband's son. He had become a mirror that reflected back to me the woman I once was desired, noticed, alive. Rafik remained distant, unchanged in his patterns. He left early, returned late, and treated our home as little more than a stopover between obligations. His indifference carved a hollow space inside me, and into that space Adil's presence began to pour. Adil, perhaps sensing the void, grew bolder in his kindness. He offered to help with household chores, lingering near me as though companionship were natural. In the kitchen, he stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. In the evenings, he asked if I would join him in the courtyard for tea, since his father was rarely around. At first, I hesitated, aware of the unspoken line that divided us. Yet his laughter, his curiosity, and his earnest eyes drew me in. One evening, as we sat beneath the dim glow of the courtyard lamp, Adil spoke with unusual seriousness. He said, his voice low, "You deserve more than silence. A woman like you should be seen." His words struck me like a confession, though he never crossed the boundary of propriety. I felt my pulse quicken, not just from his words, but from the dangerous truth they carried. He saw me in a way Rafik never had. It was then I began to realize that betrayal does not begin with touch. It begins with attention, with secrets shared, with glances that last too long. Each evening talk, each accidental brush of his hand against mine while passing a cup, each question about my happiness wove an invisible thread that tied us closer. I wanted to sever it, yet every attempt only tightened the knot. I found myself dressing with more care, choosing colors I once reserved for special occasions. I told myself it was coincidence, but the mirror reflected a different story. Adil noticed, of course. His eyes betrayed admiration. He dared not speak aloud. One afternoon, as I arranged flowers in the living room, I felt his gaze on me. When I turned, he quickly looked away, but not before I caught the faint tremor of unease on his face, as though he were struggling against feelings he could not hide. My breath caught, and I realized then that this unspoken bond had grown stronger than I dared admit. That night, lying beside my husband once more, I understood that I was no longer only Rafiq's wife. I had become part of a secret world, one built on unspoken glances and quiet confessions. And though nothing irreversible had yet happened, the path ahead was clear. The turning point came on a night heavy with rain. The sky broke open in sheets of water, and thunder rolled so fiercely that the windows trembled. Rafiq had traveled out of town for business, leaving the house in unusual quiet, save for the storm's fury. I told myself I would spend the evening reading, keeping to my room, but fate, or perhaps my own weakness, had other plans. Adil knocked gently at the door, a tray of tea balanced in his hands. "I thought you might like some company," he said, his voice uncertain yet hopeful. I should have declined, but the loneliness inside me was louder than reason. I gestured for him to enter. We sat across from one another, steam rising between us. The storm outside seemed to press the world smaller, enclosing us in an intimacy that neither of us dared name. Conversation flowed more freely than ever before. He spoke of his childhood, the loss of his mother, and the shadow of a father who had always seemed distant. His honesty was raw, and in his words I recognized a wound that mirrored my own. The silence that followed his confession was not empty, but charged. His eyes lingered on mine, searching, questioning. I should have looked away, but I didn't. Instead, I felt the pull of something long denied, affection, attention, the dangerous thrill of being wanted. "Why do you look at me that way?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Because you're the only one who sees me," he replied. His words carried the weight of truth, heavy and undeniable. The space between us collapsed. His hand reached for mine, tentative yet firm. My heart pounded with guilt and anticipation, every nerve screaming that this was wrong. Yet my fingers did not withdraw. They curled around his as though they had always belonged there. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the storm outside echoing the turmoil within us. I knew that crossing this line would change everything, yet the loneliness of years pressed harder than conscience. When he leaned closer, I did not move away. The embrace that followed was hesitant, almost fragile, as though both of us feared the weight of our choice. It was not passion that overwhelmed me, but the shocking gentleness of being cherished. In that moment, I felt both alive and undone, as if I had stepped into a world where nothing could remain the same. When the storm quieted and he finally withdrew, the house seemed unbearably still. Guilt surged through me like a tide, yet beneath it burned the dangerous memory of warmth I had not felt in years. As I extinguished the lamp and lay awake in the darkness, one truth haunted me. What had begun as stolen glances had now crossed into forbidden reality. And no matter how carefully we hid it, the consequences would one day find us. That I and the days after the storm, the house carried a new kind of silence, one heavy with secrets. Every glance between Adil and me was weighted, every accidental brush of hands charged with the memory of what had happened. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I remained the dutiful wife, he the respectful son. But beneath the surface, we were bound by something fragile and dangerous, something that could not be hidden forever. Rafiq returned, tired but oblivious. He spoke of contracts and clients, never noticing the tension in the air. His indifference, once merely a wound, now felt like a shield. Yet guilt gnawed at me with every word he spoke. When his hand rested on mine at the dinner table, a simple gesture of routine, I felt the weight of my betrayal crush me. Adil, too, was not untouched. The easy laughter he once carried became strained. He avoided his father's eyes, speaking less, retreating into himself. And still, in quiet moments, his gaze would find mine, haunted, longing, and filled with an ache we both could not silence. The unraveling came slowly. One evening, as I folded laundry, Rafik entered unexpectedly. His eyes narrowed, not in anger at first, but in suspicion. "You've been different," he said, his tone sharp, distant. I forced a smile, dismissing it as weariness, but I saw the doubt settle in his expression like a seed that would grow. Soon after, the inevitable happened. Rafik walked into the courtyard unannounced one evening to find Adil, and me sitting too closely, our conversation hushed, our faces betraying more than words ever could. His silence in that moment was more terrifying than fury. He looked at us both, his jaw tight, and without a word he turned and left. The confrontation that followed was brutal, not with shouts, but with cold, unflinching truth. Rafik's voice broke, only once when he asked, "Was I so absent that you had to look to him?" My silence was answer enough. Adil stood frozen, his shame radiating, unable to meet his father's eyes. The house that once carried only emptiness now carried destruction. Trust had been shattered, and no tender word could piece it back together. Adil left the very next morning, his departure abrupt, his suitcase packed with guilt he could not bear to voice. As for me, I remained, though not as a wife in any true sense. Rafik's presence became colder, his distance now deliberate. We lived together, but the bond had been severed beyond repair. In the stillness of nights, I replayed each choice, each glance, each word that had brought us here. What I thought was love had been a hunger for recognition, a desperate search for warmth in a house of silence. And in reaching for it, I had destroyed the fragile life I once had. What stunned me was not Adil's reaction that day in garden, nor the storm that drew us together, but the truth that followed. In searching for love where it did not belong, I had lost the love I already possessed.